Hey, welcome everyone. Good evening. And this is a three-part series. We're beginning on themes within the Megillah Esther, themes that I like to call um, the eternal human vices in Megillah. We'll be talking about things that pop up in the story of the Megillah and perhaps what the Megillah Esther's message is around these themes. Um, and the first part is on materialism, or I rename it as clothing and materialism. Clothing plays a very big role in the Megillah Esther. And actually, the story goes back before the Megillah even begins. So the story of Megillus Esther, of course, we know it begins at the party, and we'll be talking about that party sort of extensively when we talk about beauty and when we talk about alcohol as well. But in the meantime, in this context, I want to speak about the role of clothing and materialism, the kalim, the fancy vessels, and clothing. So I'm just letting people into the room as I speak. I'm sorry. Um, so where does it go back? I want to share an idea from Rav Moshe Wolfson, which I always thought this was a very cool concept. He says that if you look at the holiday that we pass, the previous holiday, we'll always find in the subsequent parsha a hint to the next holiday. He says this is sort of God's way of winking at you. That's my words, not his. Where Hashem says, don't worry, you're not stuck in Gullus that long. We go from one darkness straight into the other, Geula into the other redemption. The next holiday is right around the corner. Right after we finish the holiday of Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, we read the words Vayihi or let there be light. What's the next holiday? The rabbinic holiday is the holiday of light. It's Hanukkah. Right after we finish the holiday of Hanukkah, we start to we read Parshas Vayigash. We read the following: Lechulam nasan leish chalifos smalos ulevinyamin nasan shlosh meot kesef v'chamesh chalifos smalos. So Yosef is handing out garments. He's handing out begadim, and he hands over uh, to all of his siblings a garment, but to Binyamin, his full blood sibling, he gives him five garments. And we'll talk about the Gemara in just a moment. But Rav Wolfson's note is that, well, as we're going to see, the Gemara is going to point out that Binyamin is the one who is the ancestor of Mordechai. And Mordechai is going to walk out wearing five garments. Mordechai Yotza Lefnei Melch Bilvush Malchus Techeles V'Chor V'Ater Sahav Gedola Sachar is Butz Vargaman. Five different materials. Mordechai is going to wear five garments. Where does he get the five garments from? Well, that was the Mesorah he got from Binyamin. Binyamin is his great 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 grandfather, and he received five garments from Yosef. So right after we finish the holiday of Hanukkah, what are we doing? Immediately after Hanukkah, we start talking about hinting in the Torah about Purim, right? So this pattern continues. You could find it's a challenge. Right after the holiday of Purim, look at the next parsha, see if you could find the connection to the next Yantif. Anyway, this idea is very interesting because from the very origins, according to that Maimar Chazal about the five garments, from the very origins of Mordechai and Esther, we find already garments playing a critical role in the redemptive story. So look at the Gemara. Says the Gemara like this: Efshar davar shintztabros tzadiki kashobo. It's Gemara Megillah Tesam and Beis. How could it be that the very thing that caused such misery in the lifetime of Yosef? Think about what happened to Yosef when he received a special garment. Right? His brothers bullied him. They cast him into a pit. They sold him. They assumed they told their father he was dead. He spent years as a slave. He was accused of a crime he didn't commit. And Yosef went through everything because of favoritism that was manifested in the form of an extra garment, materialism. Yosef, you think, would have learned a lesson. By the way, one of the powerful moments in Yosef's saga is when he's willing to let go of his garment. When Ashes Potiphar grabs his clothing, and what does he do? He runs away. And while it looks like that's his downfall, in that moment of him undressing, so to speak, and losing his garment, losing his cloak, Yosef rises to prominence. Of course, it takes a number of years. He has to rot completely in a prison before the plant can germinate. But Yosef Hatzadik recovers from the place that he once fell to because of the garment, because he was willing to shed that garment. Look what the Gemara says. How could it be that Yosef gives preferential treatment to one of his siblings? Hasn't he learned his lesson? What does the Gemara answer? Look at Amar ben Yamin Bar Yef's answer. Remez Ramaz Lo. He gave him a hint. Shasi ben Latzeis Menosh Yotzim Mifnei Amelach Bechamisha Lavushi Malchus. One day there's going to be a descendant that will come from you with 5 garments. Mordechai Yotzim Mifnei Lavush Malchus Tchelas, etc. Wonderful. We have a hint. Now, all the pitfalls and all the dangers of materialism, of favoritism, of obsessing over material goods and wealth, right, and status, you would think he would have learned his lesson. Says the Gemara, no, no, no. He doesn't learn his lesson because he was really teaching his son that there's someone very special who's going to come from him one day who's going to need 5 garments. Like, okay, that's a very nice idea, but I'll peep shot that doesn't really answer the question. It seems like a terribly irresponsible thing to do to hand over a garment that is going to seed more jealousy, more kina, more hatred, right? Violation del Reisel Sachmod. So how do we escape that? The Gemara says, well, he's giving him a hint. Oh, because it's a hint, it's acceptable. So we have to understand what in the world that means. Um, and perhaps we have time, we'll come back to a great story that I'd like to share with you. Clothing somehow, according to this Gemara, is the secret of the redemption of the Jewish people in the time of Esther and Mordechai. Somehow that was the antidote, something having to do with begadim. Our relationship with clothing and with materialism is complex. First of all, at face value in the opening chapter, clothing and materialism doesn't really bode well for the person who possesses it. The Haro Soes Usher Kivod Malchuso Mordechai Achashverosh is showing off the glory of his Malchus Yikar Tiferet Gedula, to how precious and the splendor of his greatness. Yamim Rabim Shmono Me'at Yom. What was the purpose of the party? To show off his immense wealth. And we describe in great detail those items, the materialism of the materialism that is found in Shushan Habira. I'm just going to open up my Megillah Esther. I apologize. And it spares no detail. There's a lot of focus on this types of materials that are hanging around. Here we go. It's already so next pasuk. Feast. Karpas, Techeles, Achuz, Bechavle Butz, V'Argaman, Ovli Chesef, Amudei Shesh, Mitod Zav, Chesef, Al Ritzpat, Bohet, V'Shesh. I mean, pillars are covered in marble and incredible expensive materials, gold and silver, wine poured in all these beautiful cups, and the chor, tcheles, and argamon are the most expensive materials in biblical times. What's interesting is one of the materials is called karpas. You recognize that word? Karpas? Right. So what's the deal? What are we doing? We're dipping our. Did he line the walls with like romaine leaves or horseradish, according to the right the European approach? What did Achashverosh have hanging on the walls? The drapes were made of what? Of lettuce. So there is one opinion that actually, no. Karpas is a precious material, which is the pshat. And when we dip the karpas, we're actually dipping, if you look at the way the Some Mefarshim explain what it refers to the ketonet pasim. That it's a reference to Yosef's coat that was dipped in the blood. And that's one of the things we're thinking about on Pesach, that we're reenacting the dipping of Yosef's coat in blood. I believe it's the son of the Rambam who points this out, Rabbi Avram ben Rambam. And by dipping the coat in the blood, right, we recognize how we got into this mess of Galus Mitzrayim in the first place. Right? So we're the reason we're in exile is because there were once upon a time a bunch of brothers who couldn't get along because of a stupid coat. And that's how we begin the night of Maschil Beginus Messiah B'Shevach. We begin with, but that's Pesach. That's the next Yantiv. I want to start for a moment. I want to come back to right now to Purim. So just to show you that that was fancy material, and it's linked into this idea of clothing. Just it's another nice little piece in this Torah. The Haroso is Osher Kvod Malchuso. Says the Gemara in Megillah, Yud Beis Manalef. He was showing off the glory of his Malchus. Amar Rabbi Yosef Bechanina. Melame Chalovash Big Day Kehuna. What was he wearing? He was wearing the clothing of the high priest. Achashverosh was walking around dressed in royal garb, not just royal garb, but high priesthood. Yakar Tiferet Gidoto Ksiv Hasam L'Chavodu L'Tiferet. It says by Achashverosh the preciousness and the Tiferet of his Gedula, right? And it says by the Big Day Kahuna L'Chavodu L'Siferes. So that word Kavod and Tiferes is a link, right? We have a hyperlink. Mara's making a comparison to show you that really the majesty that he girded himself in was the Big Day Kahuna. An amazing statement from the Gemara. And what is our impression as a result of Achashverosh's show of wealth, of opulence? It's basically that wealth and materialism is a rotten thing. It reminds us of the dipping of the coat in the blood. It reminds us that arrogance is a terrible midah. And moreover, he's holding on to the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. Where did he get this clothing from? Well, the Babylonians took it, and the Persians conquered the Babylonians. In fact, one of the interesting things historically, in the Midrashim in the beginning of the introduction to Esther Rabbah point this out, that Vashti, of course, kings would marry the daughters of other kings. So Vashti comes from the Babylonian Empire. And by Achashverosh marrying into wealth, right, he inherited that. He's like a kid playing with his father's toys at this point. He's not exactly a person of military accomplishment or for that matter any type of accomplishment. He inherited a great deal. So here he is wearing the clothing that he inherited that originally came from the Jews. Now look at the role clothing plays when Mordechai finds out about the decree. Source 5. When Mordechai Yados Kol Asher Na'asa. He found out what happened. What did he do? Vayikra Mordechai is begadav. He tore his clothing. Vayilbash sak veifer. What kind of clothing did he wear? The opposite of the type of clothing that Achashverosh wears. Sackcloth, ashes. He went out into the city and he yelled out a bitter and horrendous and terrible cry. He went up to the king, the gate of the king. And this is critical. You can't go past the gate if you're wearing sackcloth. And keep in mind, what does the word melech mean in the Megillah? There are two interpretations. One is Achashverosh, and the other refers to Hamelech, the king. That's Hakadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem. So you can't go past the gate with sackcloth. And keep in mind our ideas that we have, I guess, from childhood, maybe because we're living in a Christian-dominated culture, about wealth, about fancy clothing, materialism, and what it means to be a religious person. Religious person and they sell you on this idea of like a myth of sort of Judeo-Christian values, as if we share all ideas, right, in common. A lot, but not all, right? We don't kill, we don't steal, all those things. It's great, but there are some very important subtle differences. One of them is our attitude towards money and towards materialism. But you cannot go to the king, not just the king Achashverosh, but you can't go to the king Hashem wearing sackcloth. Right? You don't walk into shul wearing certain types of clothing that maybe you'd wear in the street. So the makom asher dvar melech v'dato magia of Avil Gadol, there was place wherever there was great mourning, like Yehudim et som ubechi, fasting, crying, mispaid, sak ve'efer, yutzal rabim. Everybody was in sackcloth and ashes, right? But tavona narot Esther. Sarah said, now Esther's maidens and the eunuchs, they told her what was happening. Right? You have this like there's a wall, right? And in between the wall, you have on two sides of the wall, you have Esther and Achashverosh, and you have on the other side, you have Mordechai and all the Jews. I always think of this like Israel and the Gullus, like Jews are living in bliss and there's something going on in Israel, you have no idea. So you have two sides of the wall of the palace of the king, inside the gate and outside the gate. Inside the gate, what's going on? They're living it up, right? They're bathing for 6 months in myrrh, whatever they're doing there, right? They're drinking, they're partying. So vatavona narod Esther v'saraseh gidu lo vatitchalchal hamalka meod vatishlach begadim. So what does she do? What does she send to Mordechai, her uncle, lahalbish es Mordechai lasir sakol me'alav kibel? She says, Mordechai, we need your help here. You're the leader of the Jewish people. So she sends him a gift, a care package. Quick, put these clothing on. Right? Amazon Prime, whatever it's right. Sends her a very quick message, and he refuses. He refuses to remove his sackcloth. What's going on here? What do you think? I'm inviting participation. If anyone wants to chime in, this is Zoom, so I know you're not allowed to show your face or talk. But if anyone wants to talk, they can, even if they don't show their face. What is going on here? What's happening that Mordechai and Esther are they not looking at the same reality? Is Esther in La La Land? What exactly is taking place?
Maybe she thinks that since he's like a important person, he should be dressed accordingly.
It's not mechubad, right? It's not mechubad for Mordechai. Okay, and what do you think Mordechai is thinking of Esther? Esther, you have, you know, get what the realize what's happening. The Jewish people are compromised. By the way, simple reading the Megillah is Mordechai is criticizing Esther and saying, "Don't you know you're a Jew and look what's happening to us?" But they're each, I think, actually, they're each playing their role. Um, but there is this struggle in how we present ourselves and what is considered mechubad, what's considered respectable, and it's highlighted no greater than the difference between one side of the wall, the palace, and the other side. Now, let's take a moment to talk about Judaism's approach to wealth and and poverty. I want to say clearly, Judaism does not celebrate poverty. I don't know where this idea came from, that there's something glorious and something nice to being schleppy and to being. It's not our religion. Now, we're hopefully not a religion that obsesses over money. We believe very much in giving away money in tzedakah, high percentages of our money, in living a mechubad life, but not above our means. But Judaism doesn't celebrate poverty. Many of our sages, our rabbinic figures, were extraordinarily wealthy. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Tarfon, many of the Rishonim, Achronim. But wealth and clothing seem to be tied in intrinsically with sin and piety. That's part of it also, right? You see Mordechai is observing some sort of something, and Esther is also a hero. So I want to show you the first tie-in to clothing and sin. Where's the first time we find clothing in the Torah? So that takes place in Gan Eden, and um, Adam and Chava taste from the Eitz Hadas Tov v'Ra, and they were naked because they didn't have knowledge to be aware of their nakedness, and they suddenly are searching for clothing when they're infused with das, right? It's like they all of a sudden, wait a minute, this is not right, and they search for clothing. They find a fig leaf because figs have very big leaves, and then cover up their nakedness. Now, one of the deals, one of the four opinions in Chazal as to what the Eitz Das Torah was a fig because of that, right? So what do we learn? Nakedness is sinful, and being tsanua, we'll talk about Noba next time, in beauty and right, intimacy, being tsanua is pious, right? Now you could take this to extreme. You could walk into a I was walking around Mea Sharm and I saw this new thing is this new sort of more crazy group of Jews who are extreme in their dress. And they not only cover up head to toe, but they cover up their face, and they cover up their mouths, and they cover up their eye, and they wear a special form around to alter the shape of their bodies. and it's like it's one upping, more than most radical groups of Islam. Um, the idea that everything about our bodies is sinful and shameful. This is a distortion of the story. But if you read the story at face value, you might think that's the case because we sinned, we were ashamed, so we covered up, and now we're not going to sin anymore. That's not what's going on at all. The idea
So,
is the human being, right, actually was pure. The human being sinned, and at that moment, clothing, which is our reaction, is to cover up our shame about who we are. But we weren't ashamed before we sinned because we were pure, right? So all shame, and it ties into what we'll talk about next time, as far as sexuality and nakedness, all of that is because we're embarrassed about who we are. Now, if you, in theory, right? In theory, if we were living in a Gan Eden state, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't mean anything. Animals, you could say a lot of terrible things about animals, but they're not immoral, right? And they don't walk around with clothing except for those little poodles that I don't know why people bring those to Chicago, the little poodle coats. They walk around with them like they're humans. But the idea is that in theory, the shame was not because of nakedness. The shame was because of who we are, right? And because we are in that level, we have to cover up. And I'm not recommending everyone who's going to reach now a level of utter piety and then walk around nude. That doesn't make any sense. But this is a sort of a theoretical idea. So actually, Rosh Shimshon Fal Hirsch in his commentary in both the Vayikra as well as he writes this in Bereshis points something out very interesting. Look at all of the words, source 6, for clothing. Itim ol ma'al. What is me'ilah? What is me'ilah? Me'ilah means misappropriation. If I went to the base of Mikdash and I bought something and I took a carbon out of the Holy of Holies and I brought it to my house and I decided to eat that meat, that's a violation called me'ilah, misappropriation. That's called Mila. Now, what word do you see at the root of Meila? Meil, a cloak, coat. What does beged, what does bogade mean? It means to rebel. It also means clothing. Midgala kan mahalach machshavati harmony, the harmonious machshava sheyetzer es shorshi aloshem ivrit, beged hu levush adam. Clothing is the garment that goes over man. Begida yafart emunim binyanim anoshim. Begida is rebelliousness. It's turning your back on someone who trusted you. Stabbing someone, right? Me'il hu levush hakohen gadol. Me'il is the holiest garment worn by the holiest man. Me'ilah hiafaras emunim binyane kedusha kuna. And me'ilah means removing the trust between us and Hashem, taking something that was sacred and mitzvah. So now, what is Rav Hirsch trying to tell us? And I think there are a few other words, by the way, that other Mepharshim point out that connect to this idea that all words for clothing are connected to sin. What he's trying to say? He's trying to say that basically that human beings, we have the capacity to achieve greatness and purity and holiness. And clothing is a reminder of that darker side, of the part of us that is not as pure. It covers up, it's shame, covering up the thing that we know we really are, but wish we weren't. Right? What do we do when we sin? What's the human reaction when we sin? Right? We cover up our eyes, we duck down, we become small. Why do we hide when we sin? Why does Adam hide when he sins? We hide because we're embarrassed. And clothing is basically hiding. And it's interesting when Yosef does his tshuva, what does he do? He sheds his cloak. He doesn't need to hold on to that material, that garment anymore, the thing that protected him. He's worthy of being great without that cloak. Right? We don't have to hold on to it anymore.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
so I once had an observation that may fit here. I'm trying to sort of think about it, which is that everything we have that's would be similar to what an animal would do, we ascribe more halachas to and more and more things too. So we eat like animals, but we have kashrut that differentiates our eating from their eating. Sexuality is a whole other thing with nida and so on and so forth. And clothing has shatnes, it has extra things associated with it, tzitzit, and other things that would also differentiate something, but I can't fit the beged element into that, except that it maybe requires more because it is a sinful reaction, so it requires more thought about the begadim maybe.
Yeah, I wouldn't try to make it all fit together. I would just say that every physical thing that we have in this world is guided by halacha and kedusha. And maybe what I would say with that is maybe you could fit in as follows: that that the goal that we have with materialism is not to say good or bad, but what we do with it. That's
Okay.
exactly. We have an obligation to elevate everything, right? But at the core, right? All of this all of this is a reminder. It has this negative association in our heads. Now I'm gonna spin the other way around. I haven't yet got to that point, but you're
Okay.
asking a good question. So that's the source. Who told you you were naked? Like Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, who told me to gidla lecha ki eromata? Who told you were naked? And what's the source? Hamin ha'etz asher tzibischa lebeticha mimenu achalta. Did you eat from this tree? You know what the Gemara says? Gemara asks, Haman min Torah 9. Where's Haman in the Torah?
Yeah.
Now, why the Gemara wanted to know where Haman was in the Torah if Haman didn't exist is a funny question. But the Gemara asks that, and you know what it says? Hamin ha'etz asher tzivisicha leviltiachol mimenu achalt. That's the source of Haman. The first time the letters Hey, Mem, Nun appear in the Torah is the Hamin ha'etz hazeh, from this tree. And so we see that there's a connection between whatever's befalling us in this story and this one moment with the Yetzer Das Torah. There's many drushas have been made out of that connection. It's a bizarre statement in the Gemara. One might be this idea of the clothing. Hamin, hamin. Now, I want to share a few other pieces that maybe spin clothing in the other direction. First, we're in the middle of this party, or materialism, and they bring out different kelim. Shonim, and we read that to the tune of Eicha, because we've already pointed out that Achashverosh is parading around in the big day Kuna Gedolah, the clothing of the high priest. Heavy Kelav Akili Elam, Nimsu Shalo Yafim Shal Elam. So they brought out Persian Kalim and Elam Kalim, and Persian ones were more beautiful. They brought out different Kalim, and each Kli they compare who has nicer vessels. Right? This is a cup from one Malchus, the Bavel, and this is from Madai, and they brought out the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, Nimsu Nayin Yafim Mechelav. And turns out the beauty and majesty of the Kelim of his Mikdash were even more beautiful than anything else. And he gives a mashal in the Madrash of a shifcha who's beautiful. When she looks at her own maiden, her face becomes sort of ashen, and so too when the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash were put up next to the Kalim of the ATT of the of the Persian Empire, the Kalim of the Persian Empire or the king would just crumble, would turn into Kelferet. It would like turn into molten lead and just fall apart. What do we see? Physical beauty, possessions, materialism. It's not a bad thing, a good thing. There's a qualitative thing here. If some are worth more than others, certain types of things are actually more valuable. But what's the problem? The problem is when those items are in the wrong possession, when those items are in the wrong hands, when physicality and when wealth is used for mundane purposes. What's the word Megilla? Megilla is you take Holy of Holies and you use it for your own dinner. Megilla is you walk around with the kale that belonged to the high priest that only wore on Yom Kippur in the middle of Iran. Hashem Yerachem, right? The Ayatollah Khomeini wearing wearing the clothing of Aaron Cohen. Could you imagine? Right? So that's Me'ilah. It's misappropriation. It's moving something where it shouldn't be, where it should be, from where it should be to where it shouldn't be. And um, and look at what the Gemara in Megillah says. They asked for Rishon ben Yochai. They said, why were the Jews? It's a sonan. It's a sonan shel Yisrael's euphemism. It means the Jews. Why were the Jews supposed to die in that generation? Why were they subject to death? Right? If not being saved by Mordechai and Esther. Amrulo, you tell it. Okay, sure. Because they enjoyed the feast of Achashverosh. So, okay, you have this beautiful feast. The Gemara says they had kosher food there. There's a little sign, right? The kosher, glad kosher. They had the charedis, the badats, every hatch in the world. Okay. And what happened? They enjoyed that su'uda, meaning there was nothing wrong with the kashrus of the su'uda, but it was the essence of what that su'uda represented. It represented a distortion of holy, taking holy things and lowering it to the base form of physicality devoid of the essence of the inside. Right? We'll talk about it as we get to alcohol, wine, and what it means and what it represents. This article I wrote, ZRC, is going to come out in a week or so on this topic. So that's take one. But it's not just materialism because it's how it's used. It's me'ilah, it's the distortion of those things. Mordechai Yatzam Mifnei Melech. Turning of events, Periches, Jews are on top. We haven't yet defended ourselves, but Mordechai is now going to be paraded around. And he comes out wearing the 5 garments, Tcheles, V'chur, V'ateres, Zahav, the Sachris, Boots, and Argaman. Sachris, Boots is one thing, so Argaman. So he's wearing his royal apparel, blue and white, great crown of gold, a robe, fine linen, purple. It's almost like the Big Day Kahuna, right? It reminds us of that. And it's similar materials also, white and gold and linen and argamon, right? Cheles, those are all in the Big Day Kahuna. And Shushan was thrilled. So all of a sudden you have Mordechai, who was wearing sackcloth, is now wearing beautiful clothing, and everything's good. Sometimes, right, it's a time to mourn. Sometimes it's a time to be sad, to wear sackcloth. And that's what's going on outside of the kingdom. Because when the wrong people occupy the throne, when Kedusha is being distorted, when Me'ilah is taking place, our reaction is we shun those things, right? When you walk into a quote unquote simcha and people are acting in a way that's just over the top and it's almost vile, and this, I'm not commenting on any simchas. I've never been to a simcha like that in this community, but I'm just saying in theory, if you went to a simcha like that, that's cause of that's a sense that this is not what Hashem wants. And it's that distortion of materialism, that obsession over wealth, the worship of wealth and of wealthy people. And you don't think it happens? Watch what happens when someone you know or know of loses their money. People stay away from them like they had the most contagious form of cancer. Something tragic happens to you, everyone's going to be there by your side. Chas v'shalom, friends will be there. You lose money, you are worthless. It is human nature. I don't know why it happens. There's something about the worship of materialism that causes us to sort of that gag reflex where we want to go the other direction. And Mordechai sees that has happened. He's wearing sackcloth. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu enters the palace again, when Hashem is no longer benister, but Hashem is benigle, and everybody sees the hand of God once again, and the Jews are on top, Mordechai is wearing the proper clothing, and he's the richest guy in the world. Right?
Rabbi?
So, sorry.
So I was just going to ask, when Achashverosh is at the beginning, and we talked about Achashverosh, the actual techelet and things, all that were not part of his clothing, but that was part of his palace. But with Mordecai, it's actually his clothing.
It's on his garments. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we
is
could point
that
out.
is that consistent with kind of what you're presenting in
Um,
that turnaround? Because Mordecai's opulence comes with clothing, whereas Achashverosh comes with the materialistic palace.
I wasn't thinking that, but it's excellent. It's very interesting. I have to take a look to make sure he's not. We don't talk about Ahasuerus's clothing. We talk about Mordecai's clothing. That's
Right,
very
but
good.
Achashverosh, when we talk about opulence, we're talking about his stuff.
Right. Right. It's possessions. It's
Right.
it's status that is lent to you because of the clothing. And whereas Mordecai's is the clothing is the expression of who he is, the inner dimension. If he's mourning, his clothing represents that. And if he's doing well, his clothing represents that. Look at it's interesting along those lines. Look at source 12. Tilbash Esther Malchus. Esther wore Malchus. Tamod b'chatz beis hamelach. Hapnim is nochach beis hamelach. V'hamelach yashav al kisei malchuso. The beis hamalchus. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mentions of Malchus in one pasuk. What's going on there? Why is the word melech repeated so many times? Specifically, I would say, why so much emphasis on this whole royalty, the garments, right, that we had earlier, that we talked about in the previous chapter, and the royal throne. And I think if you think about what's going on inside and outside of the kingdom, you have that exact point. Garments represent your mission, and the garments have to be consistent with who you are in that moment. On Tisha B'Av, you wear certain garments. On Yom Kippur, you wear certain garments. On Shabbos, you wear certain garments. And during the week, you wear certain garments. And when you're davening, you wear certain garments, right? It has to be appropriate for that expression of who you really are. So if a Jew is in crisis, right, there's the spiritual mourning. And then there's the other role that Esther plays, which is diplomacy. And for diplomacy, you can't wear rag cloth. I remember there was one of the candidates running for president several elections ago. One of the Republican candidates. I don't remember who it was. It's one of the governors, and he came out at APAC, and he was wearing a jacket. This is in 2016. He's wearing a blazer and pants that didn't match. Now, by the way, I do that sometimes also, especially on a Sunday when I wear a blue shirt. Fine, I think I'm pretty dapper, but I'm not running for president, and I'm not going to wear that on Shabbos. Now, I looked at my friend and I said, "This guy's not going to win." He says, "Why?" Because he's running for president and he's not wearing a suit. I don't. You have to know the role you're playing. It's like he woke up. He's like, "Oh, it's that day." Ugh, you know, he put his Visine in his eyes and he ran out right away. He wasn't ready. He wasn't prepared.
He was
Esther,
the guy from Ohio.
diplomat. What?
He was the guy from Ohio. I
Who
forget. He
was
was the
it?
current
Remind me his
governor of
name again.
Ohio. I forget. I was looking it up. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But like, it was a joke. It was a joke. It's like he
Yeah.
doesn't want this job.
John Kasich.
Right.
Dress for the role, right? What was it?
That's
You
his
wanted
name.
someone at the name? What?
John Kasich.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes, that's who it was.
Exactly.
Now, he probably would not have wanted to get a suit on anyway, but it didn't represent who he didn't want it. He didn't dress for the role. He didn't believe he could get it. Esther's role is diplomacy. In the palace, she must wear that royal crown. She has to wear the full getup. Mordecai's role outside is tefillah, is tshuva. The appropriate garb for that is sackcloth. Once Shevet Binyamin is restored fully, then the spiritual and the physical side are intact. And of course, Mordecai and Esther are one, then they're one team. And then the big day kahuna that was sort of placed into that family are then restored. Well, interesting thing, if you look at the Medrash Rabbah in source 14, it says that Big Day Malchus Mibaile. This is that Esther wore Big Day Malchus. Why is she wearing Big Day Malchus? Ella Shelov Shel Malchus Pesavia. The Medrash says she actually wasn't wearing Big Day Malchus. She was also mourning. It was not a right time for wearing those clothing. But rather, the clothing she wore was the clothing of the house of her father. She was wearing the clothing of the house of Binyamin. that was given to her by Yosef Atzadik. Torah Tamima cites this approach and elaborates that Esther was preparing for the second showdown between Amalek and Shaul. Shaul, who's also a descendant of Benjamin. And the clothing was the clothing of the house of Shaul, because long ago it had been stripped of that royalty when he sinned. And now that Esther, and the moment in which Shaul's clothing tore is when David actually tore Shaul's clothing. Remember that scene? Shaul is in the cave. He's relieving himself. He's going to the bathroom, and David wants to prove that he could have killed him. So he doesn't kill him. He actually just tears the corner of his garment. Because of that, David is not given proper warmth of his physical body when he's an old man. In the book of Malachim, the beginning of Malachim, David can't stay warm because his clothing, anyone who's mavaza clothing, who disgraces clothing doesn't take care of you, the Medrash says. But in that moment, Shaul had his clothing stripped of him, but not in a I'm willing to get rid of this, but rather in a disgraceful way. And finally, Shaul reclaims his garment. He reclaims his garb, says the Torah Tamima. And Esther, who is part of that family of Binyamin and Mordechai, together they reclaim the kedusha of what is clothing, what it's supposed to represent. Dignity, the outward expression of inner holiness, of inner dignity, of inner kedusha. And so they can leave the sackcloth behind, and Mordechai can march out in the 5 garments. And Esther says, Lov Shamalchus Beisavia. She donned the clothing of Shaul that was stripped of him when he failed to confront Agag, the king of Amalek. The descendant of Amalek comes down to the world again, Haman, and finally Shaul's descendant achieves this. And they unite Mordechai and Esther in redeeming the purpose of clothing. Now, I'll share a story. The story goes like this. In the biography of Rav Lau, there is a story about him as a little boy after his parents were killed. And the only one taking care of him, he was known as Lulik, and his older brother Naphtali, who took care of him. And he credits, as everyone knows, he credits his older brother Naphtali for saving his life on numerous occasions. So there was this cruel guard named Kiesling in the camp. It was in the Gestapo headquarters, and he ordered the children, 11 children, to be brought immediately there. And he said he's going to kill them unless he's paid off a large sum. And just for this occasion, Rav Lau recalls that his mother prepared them for this, and she actually sewed into the garment of Naphtali a beautiful large diamond from her ring. And she said, there may be a time you need this to save your life or save your brother's life. Take this diamond out of the garment. But they realized also there's another thing that the mother did. The mother also placed a diamond in his tooth, a smaller diamond, as a filling. They had a dentist drill it in. And they saw that this time that he would be bribed with the smaller diamond. And so they got a dentist who was in the barracks, or it was actually a goldsmith in the barracks, to drill it out of his tooth, give that diamond off to this terrible man named Kiesling, bribed him, and he saved all 11 children's lives. On another occasion, the same guy came around, and he said that because they thought that it would be a shame to waste the first time, the same guy came around and he was going to kill young Rav Lau, Rav Yisrael Meir Lau, Lulik. And Naphtali recalled that the treasure, which was now sewn into the garment, and they took out that one out of the garment, and they gave it over to him, and now exchange for that he received his life. And he writes, several months after this happened, Kiesling again plotted to eliminate the children, and Naphtali had no other choice but to redeem my life, third time, with a large. The second time, but again, it happened another time that they had something reserved for the future, and that was in his shoe. She left their father's gold watch sewn into a pocket, I guess that was made a makeshift pocket in the shoe, hidden inside his shoe, and that was kept on hand for one day when the new Kiesling would appear and make a fanatical demand again to save his life. And Rav Lau recalls that clothing and the material goods and the wealth that was implanted in the tooth, in the clothing, in the shoe. It was all there to save his life. And this is one of the reasons he says that his brother was able to save him. And you had this great chief rabbi and current chief rabbi, right? It's all because it's his son, all because someone had the vision to provide that wealth, to provide that glory, that clothing with the child, right? The vast riches. And I think that is really what's going on here. The story of Binyamin and Yosef. What does it say? The Gemara says, what didn't Yosef learn his lesson? Didn't Yosef know that materialism breeds jealousy? It's physical, it's vanity. Didn't he know the meaning of sin, as Rav Hirsch said, was all about anything that clothing represents Begida, it represents rebellion, it represents Me'ila? Didn't he know that? He says, no, it's Me'ila. It's an expression of the inner dimension. Earlier on in Yosef's life, he wasn't ready for that. A cloak was just a cloak. It was a means of him to brag, to toss his hair in the air, and to basically put his siblings down. When he learns to shed that garment, he learns of inner kedusha, of the strength of character it takes to say no to temptation, to Eshes Potiphar. That's when Yosef earns his real cloak. And then Yosef is ready to really give that gift. And he seeds that garment. He says, "Listen, will come a day, Binyamin, when your descendants will need these garments. Well, they need to know they'll need to know the real value of of materialism, of physical things in this world, and that ultimately it is an expression of who you are. If you're willing to do tshuva, if you sit in your nehenem oso suda shel rasha, if you sit and you eat the feast because it's kosher, and you eat in a lavish way, in a disgusting, revolting way, then ultimately you don't know what materialism is all about. It's not what it is. But if you learn about the inner holiness of a Jew who can connect to Hashem inside or outside of the palace, then you're going to come back in and one day you're going to earn those 5 garments once again. Lovsha Malchus Beisavia. She wore the Malchus of the house of her father. And that's what Yosef was doing. Yosef was saying, you have in you to rectify the sin of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. Hamina Eitz Hachalta, right? The tree of Haman. You have the ability to fight against the seed of Haman, against the seed of Agag, of Amalek. How do you fight Amalek, who only cares about the physical? You understand that the physical is a manifestation of who we are on the inside. And if you could recognize that, you could rectify what happened from the very beginning of Sefer Bereshis, a sin that begins with misunderstanding materialism, with misunderstanding the gifts that God gave us, what they represent, what they're here for. Once we begin to see that as a clothing of holiness, then materialism takes on a new level. Now you understand that it's not the physical things that are good or bad or holy or unholy, but it's rather an expression of who we are on the inside. Person works on that, then ultimately the outside begins to shine and represent those very same values that they are supposed to represent as they do by the end of the story. So these are, I want to apologize. I recognize that a lot of this sort of scattered ideas I've been working on throughout the years and put together. I think if you think about it, hopefully it makes a little sense. One piece of this, 1 piece or 2 pieces of the shear make sense, then I'm grateful. But I do believe that it's not for naught that that materialism represents so much within our religion and within the story of Esther. And I think this might be part of some of these ideas might be part of the reason. So thank you. If you have any questions, take them. Otherwise, we'll see everyone next week, Mirz Hashem, as we come back to talk about part 2 in Eternal Human Vices. We talk about beauty and intimacy in the eyes of Judaism. Everyone have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.